The forest was quiet under a blanket of stars, its stillness broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the night breeze. Ethan Reeves sat on the creaking porch of his cabin, staring into the darkness with a coffee cup warming his hands. This was the solitude he had sought, a life of tools, engines, and self-reliance, far from the noise of society. Yet tonight the universe had other plans. A streak of light tore through the sky, illuminating the forest in an unnatural brilliance. It moved with a precision no meteor could manage, its fiery trail splitting the heavens as it arced downward. The ground trembled with the impact, a rumble that reached Ethan's bones. He bolted upright, the coffee cup tumbling to the ground. Grabbing a flashlight and a wrench, a reflexive choice for a man who lived by fixing things, he sprinted toward the direction of the crash. The underbrush tugged at his boots, and the sharp scent of scorched wood grew stronger as he neared. Finally, he reached a clearing where the trees had been flattened in a perfect circle. There, nestled among the wreckage, was something he could barely comprehend. A craft of shifting metallic hues shimmered under the moonlight, its surface smooth and seamless. Its edges were jagged where the crash had torn it apart, and faint trails of smoke rose into the night air. Ethan approached cautiously, his heart pounding. The ship pulsed faintly, a rhythmic hum that seemed alive. As he circled the wreckage, he saw movement, a shadow shifting within. He froze, tightening his grip on the wrench. The figure that emerged was like nothing he had ever seen. She was tall, her form lithe and elegant, with skin that shimmered faintly like liquid silver. Her large eyes, glowing softly, fixed on him with an intensity that made him step back. She moved with caution, her long limbs deliberate in their grace, as though testing the weight of gravity. For a moment, they stood in silence. Ethan's mind raced with questions, but he found himself unable to speak. Then, the figure raised a hand, her fingers long and tapered, and a sensation washed over him, not words, but emotions, urgency, desperation, a plea for help. "You need help?" Ethan asked, his voice unsteady. Her head tilted in a way that seemed like a nod. She gestured toward the wreckage, her glowing eyes pleading. He hesitated. Everything in his body told him to run. Yet, he couldn't ignore the desperation in her gaze. Something about it felt human. Finally, he let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding and nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The alien followed him back to the cabin, her movements deliberate but cautious, as if the world beneath her feet was strange. Inside, the small room was cluttered with tools, half-finished projects, and salvaged machinery. Ethan cleared a space on the workbench and turned to her. "Show me what's wrong," he said, holding up a notepad and pencil. She looked at him, then touched her temple. A faint glow emanated from her hand, and suddenly, Ethan's mind was flooded with images. He saw the inner workings of her ship, intricate circuits that pulsed like veins, panels of light and energy, and a crystalline core that throbbed with life. Then came the damage, shattered conduits, ruptured energy lines, and the core flickering dangerously. The vision ended as quickly as it began. Ethan staggered, gripping the edge of the table to steady himself. "Okay," he said, rubbing his temples. "That was intense. But I think I get it. Your ship's broken, and it's only a matter of time before that core of yours gives out." She nodded, her expression solemn. "Well, I don't have your fancy alien tech," he said, gesturing to his modest collection of tools, "but I can try to improvise. If we're lucky, I might have something that'll work." She regarded him skeptically but stepped aside, allowing him to begin. The days that followed were unlike anything Ethan had experienced. The alien woman stayed close, watching as he disassembled old machines and scavenged for parts. She often intervened, demonstrating how to manipulate energy with a precision that left him in awe. Her methods were baffling yet effective, and though they couldn't speak the same language, they found ways to collaborate. Despite their progress, tensions grew. She was clearly frustrated with his slower, trial-and-error approach, often shaking her head or gesturing impatiently when he made mistakes. Ethan, for his part, bristled at her unspoken criticism. "Look," he snapped one evening after yet another failed attempt. "I don't have your technology or your knowledge. I'm just a guy trying to help with what I've got. So maybe cut me some slack." Her glowing eyes narrowed, but then her expression softened. She touched her chest and bowed her head slightly, a gesture that Ethan interpreted as an apology. "Yeah, well," he muttered, turning back to his work. "It's not like I've done this before." The tension began to ease after that. Slowly, they started to learn from each other. She showed him how to redirect energy through salvaged materials, creating makeshift conduits that mimicked the ones in her ship. Ethan, in turn, taught her the value of improvisation, using Earth's primitive tools to solve complex problems. As they worked, fragments of her story emerged. Through flashes of memory and gestures, Ethan learned that she had left her home not just for exploration, but to escape a rigid, emotionless society. Her people valued efficiency above all else, leaving little room for individuality or emotion. "That sounds awful," Ethan said one night as they sat by the fire. "No wonder you wanted to leave." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, for the first time, she smiled, a small, fleeting gesture that caught Ethan off guard. By the 5th day, the repairs were nearly complete. The ship's core began to hum steadily, its light brighter and more stable. Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, relief that their work had paid off, and sadness that their time together was ending. When the final connection was made, the alien woman stepped back and examined their work. Satisfied, she turned to Ethan and extended her hand. And it was a small, glowing crystal. "What's this?" he asked, taking it carefully. She placed a hand over his and closed her eyes. A wave of gratitude washed over him, followed by an impression, a gift, a memory, a piece of her world. "Thank you," Ethan said softly, his voice thick. She nodded, her luminous eyes meeting his for a moment longer before she turned toward the ship. As she climbed inside, Ethan felt a pang of regret. He had grown used to her presence, her quiet strength and otherworldly grace. The ship roared to life, its hum now a steady, powerful rhythm. Ethan stepped back as it began to rise, its shimmering surface reflecting the light of the fire. She looked at him one last time, her hand raised in a gesture of farewell, before the ship ascended into the sky. Ethan stood there long after the ship had disappeared, the glowing crystal warm in his hand. The forest was quiet once more, but the stars above felt closer than ever before. Ethan stayed rooted to the spot, staring into the empty sky long after the alien woman's ship had vanished. The crystal in his palm pulsed faintly, its warmth seeping into his skin. It felt alive, as if it carried a fragment of her essence. Turning it over in his hand, he noticed the subtle glow shifted in color, almost reacting to his thoughts. He finally turned back toward his cabin, the reality of her absence settling over him. The space felt different now. Emptier somehow. The tools strewn across the workbench, the spare parts piled in corners, and even the faint scorch marks on the floor where she had demonstrated her energy manipulation all spoke of her presence. Yet she was gone. Ethan placed the crystal on the table and sat down, running a hand through his hair. He felt an ache, one that was hard to define. It wasn't just about her departure. It was about what she had represented. For years, he had lived in isolation, content to tinker with machines and let the world pass him by. But in the short time they had spent together, she had reminded him of something he hadn't realized he missed: connection. The days that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that once brought him peace but now felt oppressive. He found himself glancing at the sky more often, wondering if she would ever return. The crystal became a fixture on his workbench, its glow a constant companion. He discovered that it responded to his touch, emitting faint vibrations and flickers of light that seemed to resonate with his emotions. One evening, as he sat by the fire, the crystal began to glow more brightly than usual. Startled, Ethan picked it up, feeling a subtle energy coursing through it. Images filled his mind, fractured, fleeting glimpses of her world. He saw towering spires of crystal, glowing rivers that wound through valleys of iridescent trees, and skies filled with swirling constellations. But there was something else, too, her memories. Ethan saw her as a child, surrounded by others like her, their expressions calm and detached. He felt her yearning for something more, her frustration at the cold logic that defined her people. He saw her moments of solitude, gazing at the stars, dreaming of a life beyond the confines of her structured world. When the vision ended, Ethan sat back, the crystal still warm in his hand. It wasn't just a gift, it was a piece of her, a way for her to share what words could not. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan found himself changing. He began to venture out of the forest more often, interacting with the small town nearby. People who had once seemed like strangers now became acquaintances, and he started offering his skills as a mechanic to help them. The isolation he had once cherished now felt like a barrier he no longer needed. One day, while working on an old generator for a local farmer, Ethan felt the crystal in his pocket vibrate faintly. He paused, pulling it out. Its glow was stronger than ever, pulsing in a steady rhythm. A wave of emotion washed over him. Anticipation, excitement, and a faint sense of urgency. He looked to the sky, his heart racing. Was she coming back? That night, Ethan stayed outside, staring at the stars. Hours passed, and just as he began to lose hope, a familiar light appeared on the horizon. It streaked across the sky, descending in a controlled arc toward the forest. Ethan ran to the clearing where her ship had crashed months ago. This time, the landing was smooth. The ship settled gently on the ground, its surface shimmering as before. The hatch opened, and she emerged, her glowing eyes meeting his. She was unchanged, yet something in her demeanor felt different, softer, more open. She approached him, and without hesitation, extended her hand. Ethan took it, the warmth of her touch both familiar and electric. "You came back," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her thoughts brushing against his. This time, the emotions were clear. Gratitude, longing, and an unspoken bond that had grown stronger in their time apart. Over the next hours, they sat by the fire, communicating as best they could. She shared more of her story, projecting memories of her journey since they last met. Ethan told her about the changes in his own life, how her presence had inspired him to reconnect with others. As the firelight flickered, Ethan realized that their bond went beyond words or even worlds. She had shown him a universe of possibilities, and in turn, he had given her a glimpse of humanity's resilience and heart. When dawn broke, the ship stood ready to depart again. This time, however, the goodbye felt different. It wasn't an ending but a promise of something more, a connection that would endure, no matter how many stars lay between them. As she ascended into the sky once more, Ethan stood in the clearing, the crystal glowing softly in his hand. He didn't feel the same ache as before. Instead, he felt hope, knowing that their paths would cross again. And in the quiet of the forest, he smiled, ready to face whatever came next, knowing he was no longer alone. As the glow of her ship disappeared beyond the horizon, Ethan lingered in the clearing, letting the quiet seep back into the forest. He ran his fingers over the crystal in his hand, its light steady and warm. It felt like a tether, connecting him to a reality far beyond his small life in the woods. Returning to his cabin, he placed the crystal on his workbench once more, its faint hum settling into the background of his thoughts. Life resumed, but now it had a rhythm he hadn't noticed before, a sense of anticipation. The days no longer stretched endlessly. They became stepping stones toward an uncertain but intriguing future. Months passed, and Ethan continued his newfound connection to the nearby town, repairing machines and even teaching others the tricks of his trade. He found himself explaining things more patiently, understanding that curiosity often sparked where there was unfamiliarity. This reminded him of her, how her eyes had glimmered with interest when she watched him cobble together fixes for her alien systems. One evening, after another long day, Ethan returned to his cabin to find the crystal glowing brighter than ever. Its vibrations resonated so strongly that it rattled the tools on his bench. "What's going on?" he muttered, picking it up. The moment his hand closed around the crystal, a surge of energy shot through him. His vision blurred, and then his mind was flooded with images, a vast expanse of space, distant star systems, and a faint outline of a planet bathed in violet light. Overlapping these images was an unmistakable feeling. Urgency. A call for help. Ethan's heart pounded. He didn't fully understand the message, but one thing was clear. She needed him. Ethan paced his cabin, staring at the crystal. He didn't have a spaceship or the means to cross the stars, but he couldn't ignore the plea. Then an idea struck him, the clearing where her ship had landed. Perhaps she had left behind something, anything, that could help him. He gathered his flashlight and a backpack, filled with tools and supplies, and set off into the night. The forest felt alive, the shadows almost dancing in anticipation. When he reached the clearing, he searched every inch of it, hoping for a clue. At the edge of the clearing, partially buried beneath the dirt, he found it, a small, metallic disc etched with strange symbols. The moment he touched it, the crystal in his pocket began to glow brighter, the two objects resonating in harmony. The disc activated, projecting a faint hologram of her ship, its energy systems highlighted. Ethan stared in awe. It wasn't just a blueprint, it was a guide. For weeks, Ethan worked tirelessly. The hologram provided instructions that were beyond anything he had ever encountered, but it also unlocked parts of his mind he didn't know existed. The crystal seemed to amplify his intuition, helping him understand concepts he would have dismissed as science fiction. Using salvaged parts from old machinery, pieces from the wreckage of her initial crash, and the glowing disc as a central component, Ethan began constructing something he had only dreamed of, a vehicle capable of leaving Earth. The work consumed him. Day turned into night, and seasons shifted as he toiled. The townsfolk noticed his absence, but those who ventured to his cabin found only cryptic remarks about a project. Finally, after months of relentless effort, it was ready. The craft was crude compared to hers, more a patchwork of Earth's technology and alien ingenuity, but it hummed with life. The crystal pulsed steadily at its core, its energy the heart of the ship. Ethan stood back, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I don't know if this is going to work," he muttered. "But if you're out there, I have to try." The launch was rough, the ship shaking violently as it broke through Earth's atmosphere. Ethan gripped the controls tightly, his heart hammering in his chest. But once the craft stabilized, a sense of awe washed over him. The vastness of space stretched before him, an endless sea of stars. Guided by the crystal and the coordinates embedded in the disk, he navigated through the void. The journey was both harrowing and mesmerizing, with bursts of color from distant nebulas and the silent watch of asteroid fields. After what felt like days, the crystal flared brightly, signaling that he had arrived. Ahead was the violet-hued planet from the vision. It glowed like a jewel, its surface shimmering with energy. As he descended, he marveled at its beauty. Sprawling crystalline cities, rivers of light, and skies that shifted colors like a living painting. The ship landed gently in a clearing surrounded by towering structures that seemed to hum with their own energy. As he stepped out, he saw her. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her silver skin glinting under the alien sun. Her glowing eyes widened in disbelief, then softened with recognition. Ethan approached, unsure of what to say. She reached out, her hand brushing against his, and a flood of emotions surged between them, relief, gratitude, and a bond that had only grown stronger in their time apart. She led him into her world, a place of breathtaking beauty and complexity. Ethan quickly realized that her people were in trouble. Their technology, while advanced, was failing in ways they couldn't comprehend, problems that required creativity and intuition, traits her kind had long suppressed. Ethan became an unlikely ally, using his resourcefulness to repair systems and teach her people the value of improvisation. In return, they shared their knowledge, expanding his understanding of the universe. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan and the alien woman grew closer. Their connection transcended words, built on shared experiences and mutual respect. Together, they bridged the gap between their worlds, proving that even across the vastness of space, bonds could form and flourish. Though he missed Earth, Ethan felt a sense of belonging he hadn't known in years. For the first time, he wasn't just fixing machines. He was building a future, one where two worlds could coexist and learn from each other. And at the heart of it all was the crystal, glowing softly as a symbol of their unbreakable connection. Ethan's days on her planet turned into months, each one filled with discoveries and challenges that deepened his bond with her and her people. His ingenuity, born of years spent fixing the unfixable on Earth, proved invaluable. He adapted their failing systems with creative solutions, blending human resourcefulness with their advanced energy manipulation. In return, the alien woman, whom Ethan now thought of as a true partner, guided him through the wonders of her world. She showed him how their crystalline structures harnessed natural energy, how their rivers of light carried information, and how their society functioned with a level of harmony he could scarcely imagine. But her world wasn't without its problems. The reason her people had once suppressed individuality and emotion was to prevent conflict over resources and ideals. Now, as their technology faltered and survival became uncertain, those old tensions began to resurface. Ethan became a bridge between two extremes. His ability to approach problems with both creativity and practicality inspired her people to embrace change. They learned from his determination and willingness to take risks. More importantly, they began to understand the value of emotional bonds, something Ethan and his partner embodied every day. One pivotal moment came when a critical energy conduit failed in one of their largest cities, threatening to plunge it into chaos. The alien woman and Ethan worked tirelessly, combining her deep understanding of the technology with his knack for makeshift solutions. When their efforts restored power, the city erupted in a rare, collective celebration. It was in the aftermath of this success that her people formally acknowledged Ethan as one of their own. Though he was human, they saw him as a catalyst for their evolution, someone who had shown them that emotion and individuality were not weaknesses, but strengths. For Ethan, the acceptance felt like coming full circle. For years, he had isolated himself, feeling out of place even among his own kind. Now, in a world so different from his own, he had found a community and a purpose. One evening, under the planet's ever-shifting skies, Ethan and the alien woman stood on a crystalline balcony overlooking the glowing city. The air buzzed softly with energy, a gentle hum that seemed to mirror their thoughts. "I never imagined I'd end up here," Ethan said, looking at her. "When I first saw your ship, I was just a guy living in a cabin, fixing things because I didn't know what else to do." She tilted her head, her glowing eyes watching him intently. Through their unspoken connection, he felt her gratitude and admiration. "You've given me more than I ever thought possible," he continued. "But I can't help wondering, what now? Do I stay here forever? Do you come back with me to Earth?" For a moment, she was silent. Then she reached out, taking his hand. A wave of understanding passed between them. This wasn't about one world or the other. It was about creating something new together. Ethan and his partner presented an idea to her people, a way to combine the best of both worlds. They proposed building a gateway, a connection between her planet and Earth. It would allow for an exchange of knowledge, culture, and resources, fostering understanding between their species. The project was ambitious, requiring years of work and collaboration. But with Ethan's determination and her leadership, it became a reality. Using the crystal as the cornerstone, they constructed a shimmering portal in the clearing where her ship had first crashed. On the day it was activated, the clearing was filled with her people and representatives from Earth. Scientists, engineers, and dreamers from both worlds stood side by side, marveling at what they had achieved together. As the gateway hummed to life, Ethan looked at his partner, his heart swelling with pride. They had done this together, not just the two of them, but their people, united by a shared vision. Ethan chose to split his time between the two worlds. On Earth, he worked to help humanity adapt to the incredible knowledge her people shared. On her planet, he continued to learn and grow, exploring the wonders of a universe that had once seemed unreachable. The alien woman often accompanied him to Earth, her presence sparking curiosity and hope among those she met. Together, they became symbols of what was possible when barriers, both physical and emotional, were broken down. Their bond deepened with every passing year, evolving into a love that transcended language, species, and even galaxies. They built a home on her planet, a place filled with the warmth of shared memories and the promise of countless adventures yet to come. As they stood beneath the stars one quiet evening, Ethan held the crystal in his hand, its glow a reminder of how far they had come. He looked at her and smiled. "I think this is what I was always meant to do," he said. She placed her hand over his, her thoughts merging with his own. "And I was meant to find you." Above them, the sky shimmered with light, two worlds forever connected, their futures intertwined. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt complete, knowing that the adventure was only just beginning.